Hey, well, welcome back. I took so much stuff off of this buggy, I hardly know where to start. To tell you what I've done, there's been a ton of positive thought that went into this since the last time. I want to take a look at some special stuff that we've been working on, and so let's get the camera switched over to the top view, and I'm going to tell you what's going on the inside. So, it's pretty simple. It's pretty simple. I started chopping out some plastic here. I want to show you what that is. Right inside here, this huge bar used to be the battery tray, and it kind of went in here like that. So this used to be the battery tray. Now the trouble is, I can't help myself. Anyway, I chopped it out. So that's the stuff that I took out. It turns out that it was gummy and disgusting plastic, which is a really good thing, because if you're working on some kind of a rock bouncer buggy, you don't want that rigid plastic. You want the stuff that you can kind of, that's pliable and whatever. So I'm glad it was more difficult to cut out, to be honest. Why would I go and do this? You must be crazy, is what you're thinking. Except that because we're talking about drivetrain, and I kind of like this thing now. It's the emptier it gets, the more I actually like it. Sounds really funny, but I'm going to put a scale transmission in it. We talked about this last time with the gearing. The Axial kit was the 2-speed Axial kit that we talked about in part 1 video. It gives you a lower gear for first gear. I got a ton of really great comments on that video. Thank you so much to everybody who contributed to the post and the YouTube comments, because what I found out is that you can do a bunch of gearing changes on it. You can get spur pinion combinations for the factory transmission for the Ryft that can bring your speed way down. The whole point of what I was trying to do was slow it right down so I could actually get really good video of it rock crawling. It doesn't drive very well at high speed. Very unpredictable. We talked about that in the first video. Anyway, to move on, thanks to all your comments, I was able to determine that no matter what I did with the 2-speed Axial kit and the lower ring and pinion, the lower spur and pinion in the transmission, the factory stuff, I could not get it to slow down to the level that I was looking for. So that meant go for a different transmission. And of course, we can't help ourselves. We have to LRT everything. So I set up an LRT exactly for this. This thing makes me so happy. I don't even know. I'm just gonna show you how it goes in and what I did to put this into this buggy. There were a few key things. We're going to go over them here in a second. So, what do we do? First off, the LRT, this is the transmission that we use in a lot of our scale trucks. You guys that have known about this for a long time, you know that I also put it into our, what I now called the flinger. It used to be a scale truck blazer, and now it's the flinger. It's a pull sled. I ran a 4-cell 4600 kV Castle combo on a 4-cell in this transmission. There's nothing wrong with this transmission. This thing is so strong, it's ridiculous. Running that in a rock buggy is no problem. Trust me. So, what I wanted to do was find a way to get this transmission into this buggy. It's kind of in the right spot already. Because as far as buggies go, you just need to have, a big empty engine bay to put a scale engine in it. You need the transfer case somewhere in the center of the chassis, which happens to be right in the middle of the skid plate in this case. And then you got to figure out your drivetrains, and that's it. So, what I did is I chopped out that piece, and then I made up these new little tabs here. So both of these tabs, they're round all the way around, you can see that. And all they do is slide over the tube. So I took the screw out right there, I took this screw out and I made up this black plastic thing that just swings on the tube here. And what it has in there is a little socket. So, see if I can show you this one right here. You can kind of see through it. There's a hole right there through it. Well, that hole is for the mounting plate on the motor right here. So, this thing actually clips into these two, and then I can mount the motor plate right there, right to the tube work. It's all hard mounted. So that went really well, and that was the reason why that got cut out. And then in the center skid, now there's lots of problems in here because of course it's huge, and now it's empty. And so what do I do to get the transfer case to stop flopping around in there? With the motor plate in, this thing is just all, that's a mess. Nowhere to bolt it to. On the bottom of this part, there's actually a couple of holes I can use for mounting, but there's no real bracket. I was going to steal the bracket we use off the SCX2 conversions. That didn't seem to be the right thing. So, of course, seems obvious, I made a new piece. Now, this piece is going in the chassis right there, and it fits just like that. So see if I can show that off a little better. It fits in the chassis like that. So it's 3D printed. Of course, I wanted to see if I could make something that would work. There's all these holes in the stock skid here for where the motor and transmission used to be. So I just used those. You know, I made the posts that match the slots in the skid plate, and then I dimpled it a few places, and I put screw holes in a few places. And so basically I've got this new tray, and what this thing does, let me move that over. What this thing does now is it holds the battery right here, and it's a rear entry, kind of like you have on the UDRs and stuff, where the batteries go into the back, through the back by the drive shaft. The Lossy rock rays and stuff have the same sort of idea. So there's a battery tray in the back. The scale transmission now sits on it just like this, and there's a clamp for that to go over top of it and keep it in place. And it already has the screw holes already there, so basically that's just going to go like that, you know, boom. That's a little too easy. So now there's a solid mount for the base. These little dimples here are actually for the lower links. The lower links actually kind of fit right there on the front. So that's what those are for. And then there's a couple extra pieces I had to make up to make this work. So I made up this little U-clamp, and this thing sits like that to capture the back of the transmission bell housing. Okay? So there's a little clamp that fits there. And then the battery has no cap, so I made up an actual battery tray cap which goes on here. So now what we've got is a drivetrain converter part set. The LRT transmission and transfer case fits in here, which also gives me overdrive, by the way. Battery tray is in there, and it takes a 3S 3500 from Helios that's made for that size. And the battery just slides right in, which is perfect. And then I've got, except for the center drive shaft to the rear, I've got all this space left over for electronics mounting or whatever. So I'm going to kind of put it together and then show you what it looks like in the truck so you can kind of see how that goes. Okay? Let me switch this over here. Okay, so I'm going to take these parts and screw them in here and show you what this is about. Put the skid plate in the bottom. I'm going to run a couple of screws in through the bottom here just so it doesn't fall apart. These are all countersunk, which is super nice because I can just stick one in and it still lies nice and flat, which I think is fantastic. Hopefully there's still a battery charge in this. Okay, So just one screw will get it there just for now. Now I'm gonna have to unzoom the top camera here so you guys can see how this stuff actually fits in. This is really cool. Hang on a second here. Where's the button? Alright, let's check this one out. Right here. Okay, so that's now mounted. Give you a little better lighting on there. We're going to stick the transmission in here like that, and then I'm going to slide these new side caps here over the motor plate as previously demonstrated. Remember how I said the tube was kind of flexible? Well, this is a really good example of why that's awesome, because I can just stretch out the tube work right now and get that put together. So, let's see if I can show you that. Right in there, you can almost see it. You can sort of see, there we go. Right there, there's a screw hole on both sides that goes right through that little black bracket into the motor plate. Pretty straightforward. And then in the center here, what we do is take this and move this around so you can see in there, if that's possible. So this thing goes over top of the back of the transmission here. This just goes over that. You can see that just fits over the loop like that. And that holds that down. And then the battery tray is going to sit on top right there. So I'm going to put a couple of screws in that so it doesn't fall out. And there's one big long one that goes directly through the battery tray lid and the transmission mount. There's one big long screw that fits right through that whole thing. And then there's two little tiny screws that just fit onto the sides here, so I'll stick those on as well. Tube cage is nice for this because you've got so much room to get in there. Not a terrible thing. One more on this side. And then we have an LRT mounted into the Ryft. I'm so excited about this. Let me tell you why, on a technical basis, why I'm so excited about this. Because the factory transmission, granted it was in second gear locked in. The factory transmission was 4.1 to 1 ratio, or really close to that. And now I've got the LRT in there, and you guys already know from all of our other stuff, the LRT transmission transfer case combo, pinion to tail shaft, is 14.3 to 1. So I'm cutting the gearing like 2.5 times, which is spectacular. So, I mean, that's really spectacular. So almost, it's 3 times, it's just going to be a third of the speed right away. Now the original motor I think was 2200 kV, I think, and I'm putting in a 2300 kV. So the motor is a spec faster. I'm still going to run it on the same 3-cell battery I was using before, but I've basically cut the speed by, let's rough it, a third. Okay, that's perfect for what I want to do with this buggy. Not only did I turn it into a scale transmission, which means now I can put an actual scale motor in there and like headers and cool stuff, because you can see through there. It's going to be awesome. But now when I redo the interior and all that, I feel like I'm actually scaling it out in a way that's definitely the level up than I was expecting. I wanted to have the drivetrain slower, but I've ended up achieving that by putting a scale transmission in it, and I couldn't be happier. So I do have the drive shafts figured out, and this is pretty interesting. I'll show you what I did with the drive shafts here in a second. Let's switch that over. So you guys know that this thing uses these king-size drive shafts. They're huge. They're 6 millimeters on the ends where they go into the transmission. They're huge. So I bought a bunch more of these. This is the drive shaft set that's used for this buggy from the factory. So what I did is I basically made new drive shafts by taking the sleeve that came with the drive shaft, and instead of it going all the way in, I actually took more drive shaft parts and cut these spacers. So it's like, it now, when I put this in the bottom of the drive shaft and then I put the drive shaft slider in, it doesn't go all the way down. See, there's a gap here because I've added an extra piece in the bottom. And by doing that, I've effectively made the drive shaft longer, because when it was together before, this part could slide back and forth all the way down and then it would fall out. And I need a longer drive shaft to get from the transmission all the way over to the shaft on the rear axle or the front axle. It wasn't long enough. Now, how do you keep this from rattling and sliding around? You do it with a spring. So what I did is I cut this little tiny spring, and then I actually just put it into the drive shaft like that. And then when I put these together now, I've actually got a springy drive shaft, which is totally amazing. And now I can guarantee that the drive shaft won't slide out, and I have tons and tons of engagement on it. It's about that much, which is a lot, especially considering I'm driving it at a higher torque and a lower speed now. So I need a good drive shaft. Now, next problem is the output shaft on the LRT transmission is a 5 millimeter output right there. These come as a 6 millimeter, and so, oh, my spring. What I actually did there is I made a spacer. So I used to make these for the E-Savage rebuilds. When we were making E-Savages years ago as GCM into race trucks, we used to make these 5 millimeter shaft to 6 millimeter drive shaft adapters. That's what's in there. So I made more. And now I have a 5 millimeter input there, and I have my springy set up here, and I can put this on the rear drive shaft here like that. I didn't put the spacer in. I'm going to put my spacer in the drive shaft, and then I'm going to put my springy part in the drive shaft, and now I can hook the drive shaft up to my transmission just like that. So now we have the drive shaft on the LRT, and it goes straight out to the rear axle, and therefore the whole drivetrain will work, which to me is totally amazing. I'm super excited about it. I think that's just totally killer. It wasn't very hard to figure out the two parts I needed to make that work, and now I've got a working drive shaft in the back, and I couldn't be happier. So, with all that said, that's the news on the drivetrain. I'm very excited to get the gearing down. I'm very excited that the whole thing actually bolts in, because that's kind of important. And you just absolutely won't even believe your mind what I've got going on for electronics in this. That doesn't have to do with this. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I really hope you guys will follow this for the next video. On the part 3, I'm going to dig into the completion of this setup here in the center and start talking about electronics placement. And there's a lot of electronics going into this that has nothing to do with the drivetrain. So stay tuned to part 3. And we thank you guys for watching. Happy trucking.